Melinda, thank you so much for joining us here at CBS News.
Glad to be here.
In your op-ed, poverty is at the center of almost every crisis: migration, economic volatility, security, climate change. What is the most urgent issue in your mind right now?
The most urgent issue is making investments in health and in infrastructure, and particularly health systems around the world, because if people have a healthy life and can start out healthy, they then can go on and educate their children and participate in the economy. But if we don't make those, what Bill and I call upstream investments in health systems, then people are in these economically terrible situations and they do get up and move, and they don't want to move out of where they live.
So you're saying that if health is good for everybody, then it will help the global economy.
Absolutely, because if health is good, health is the precursor. If we have good health, then you can start to participate in other ways. Then you can educate your children, and then they can participate and you can participate in the economy. But if you're dealing with a health crisis all the time, malaria that comes up 3 or 4 times a year inside of your family, or a child who's sick and needs to go to a health system, and it takes away your economic means to go pay for that, it changes the whole economics of your family. And so then you're in a crisis situation back to back to back.
So you're more reactive because of this crisis than being proactive about your life.
Absolutely. And so what we need to do as a world is make investments in health, make investments in agriculture systems, because predominantly people around the world still get their means out of agriculture, make investments in education, and make sure people have jobs. If you do and you work on that whole chain, then people have the opportunity to lift themselves up out of poverty, not just their family, but their community, and then it has economic gains for an entire country.
3 priorities for you for 2016: GAVI, Global Fund, and gender inequity. So let's go through GAVI first. 5 years ago, here at the World Economic Forum, the Decade of Vaccines was launched here. Are you proud of what that has achieved?
Absolutely. We see that over 440 million children are vaccinated because of that fund. 6 million children are alive. When we look at the fact that since 2000, childhood deaths have been cut in half, a big percentage of that is because of vaccines. And to me, the most exciting thing now is when I travel to a place like Kenya, instead of there being a 25-year lag from when a vaccine comes out in the United States or in the UK or in Japan, there used to be a 25-year lag till it got to places like Kenya or Tanzania. Today, that lag is down to less than a year. And guess what? The right strains of the vaccine are available from the get-go for a place like Kenya. And so they are getting the vaccines out now very quickly, and that's how we're saving lives.
Is it from technology that you're able to cut down the time from getting vaccines from point A to point B?
It's 2 reasons. One is we have this fund, so we can go to pharmaceutical companies and say, we know that your vaccine will be purchased, so make investments in vaccines. And we can go to them and say, look, there's a market not just for existing vaccines, but for new vaccines. The 2 biggest killers of children around the world are pneumonia and diarrhea. And guess what? In the last few years, we now have vaccines for both of those diseases. And so that new technology, that miracle of vaccines, is benefiting children around the world.
How do you push the envelope with the private sector to continue to have them to work with you?
Well, so many of the companies are interested in working on these issues, particularly if they see a market. So, for instance, a pharmaceutical company or a biotech company, they are beholden to their shareholders, and they should be. But if there's a market there, which there are millions of children that need vaccines, they are willing to bring the price down if they know they can sell the vaccines into a large market. So we're able to stimulate competition. The foundation's able to make some R&D investments to make it worth their while to start up the technology, but we also bring other players in to bring the prices down and stimulate the competition. But when a vaccine company knows they can make money off of one vaccine and they see it work, then they'll work on the next one.
So it's a partnership and everybody benefits at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And the other interesting thing is inside the pharmaceutical companies, the scientists want to know that if they've been doing their own great work, say for 20 or 25 years, they want to give something back. And so they're quite interested in working on these issues in the developing world.
Global Fund, your next initiative. Since 2002, number of people dying from HIV, TB, and malaria has gone down a lot, but not enough.
Correct. And so malaria deaths have dropped in half. That's pretty incredible. And because of that fund, we have more HIV medicines out to people than ever before, more tuberculosis medicines, a $10 bed net, which didn't exist before, a $10 bed net. I can say to a young child now, go online, save your allowance, and you can save a life by buying a $10 bed net. That fund is what has, again, allowed us to start to create drugs, the appropriate drugs, and bring the prices down for drugs for all of these diseases. So this is a huge year for Global Fund. Bill and I and many of the partners are out talking to the donor governments about giving to the fund again. We need to replenish that fund if we want to see the same progress against those diseases that we've seen in the past.
Is it a challenge getting this funding?
It is a challenging economic environment for all of the donor nations, but I think the thing that people are realizing is that if you make these investments, and again, we call them upstream investments, they benefit the world. And so then you're not dealing with those issues as much on your own doorstep where people are up and migrating and moving to your country, again, if they can be healthy and live where they are.
China's slowdown certainly has had an impact on global markets. Does that mean that potentially you'll have a more challenging time getting funds in the Global Fund?
Well, I think that China has given a bit to the developing world, not so much in the Global Fund itself, where I think we'll be more going towards the traditional donors who've been giving. We're also going, though, for domestic resources, and so we're starting to see that a whole host of African countries are also starting to raise their own domestic resources. And the neat thing about both GAVI and Global Fund is that eventually, as these countries become middle-income countries, they also start to graduate for these funds. And so it's a huge success story that we can go to donors and say, these funds aren't forever. We're actually seeing some of the countries graduate now and take up the financing on their own.
And then they become emerging and growth markets, and it overall really boosts the global economy.
Absolutely. Look at South Korea. They used to be a recipient of aid, and now South Korea is actually a donor of aid to around the world. They're a huge success story. And so again, it's how we can show that that is the right thing to do. You make these investments up front, the countries take them up, use the money in their own, in the right way, make all the investments that they need, and they lift themselves up, and then they go on to be part of the global economy. It's a virtuous cycle that we just start getting going with aid.
It makes so much sense. Gender inequality, another issue, front and center here at WEF, 2,500 participants and only 17.8% women. How do we improve these numbers?
Well, first of all, we have to improve the numbers. And to me, WEF is just the tip of the iceberg. It just shows you how far women are in society and that we need to do better at all levels, whether it's high income, middle income, or low income. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit to make sure that women are able to participate fully in the economy and in society. The great thing I will say about WEF is that women and girls are on the agenda more than they ever have been before. It needs to be more. We're not far enough yet. So to me, the women and girls story is one of making progress, absolutely, but not nearly enough yet. When I look around the world, I try and say, okay, where are we making progress? Well, maternal deaths are cut almost in half since 2000. We're finally getting contraceptives out. There are 220 million women that are saying they want contraceptives. We're finally are investing in that as a world. But there are still so many more opportunities because we've got to empower women so they can be healthy, be educated, and again, participate in the economy.
And a lot of the women control the purse.
In their household, and that is one of the most fundamental things to understand, and I think we've woken up into this in global health and global development, that for every marginal dollar a woman gets in her hands, she puts 90% back into her household. And she's the one who makes the decision about who eats first, what do they eat. So we have to make sure that those economic means get in her hands and she has control of it. It also starts to empower her. She's seen differently in the family when she has money, whether she lives in Asia, or whether she lives in Africa, or whether she lives in the United States. And giving her some means and control and decision making over that money changes everything.
These are three major, big, important issues that we discussed: GAVI, Global Fund, and gender inequality. I know that things may not change a year from now, but what will this look like 10 years from now?
I think 10 years from now we'll have even more children growing up healthy. I think the momentum we've already got with childhood deaths cut in half, it is taking hold and rolling. So Rwanda has the steepest decline in childhood mortality in the history of the earth in the last 5 years. It means that the investments we're making, we know what to do. So I see childhood mortality declining hugely in the next 10 years. I look at things like Global Fund, and I think there will be far fewer people getting HIV/AIDS. We'll still have a huge pool of people living with it who've already gotten it, but we can bring that down, malaria down. So I see health improving by measures in the next decade. But I also see more and more people lifted out of poverty. And again, that's if you get everybody participating, not half the workforce, not just the men, but you get women. You empower women and they become part of the economy. One of the reports here at WEF talks about that if you empower the other half, we'll add 28 trillion to the global economy. That's huge. And so I think that's going to get better in the next 10 years.